Hey everyone, we have a great program for you today with some important information for every aircraft owner. I'm Kent Dellenbush with Cessna Flyer and Piper Flyer Associations, and we are happy to present Bill Ross, Vice President of Product Support with Superior Air Parts. 4 questions you need to ask when choosing an aircraft mechanic, sponsored by Superior Air Parts and Aircraft Spruce and Specialty. Here's Bill.
Well, thank you, Kent. And I'm going to share my screen now so that you folks can see my presentation. Good afternoon or evening, everyone, depending on where you may live. I want to thank each and every one of you for allowing me to speak tonight and attending to listen for this presentation. Thanks again to Aircraft Spruce and to Superior Air Parts, my employer, for sponsoring these things and allowing me to speak to you. This is probably the highlight of my career, to get out and talk with other aircraft owners about aircraft ownership and things that we can do to mitigate some of the costs involved in owning an airplane. Just a little quick snippet about me. I learned to fly when I was 16 years old. Right out of high school, went and got my A&P license. I became a commercial pilot, flight instructor. Went back, got my 4-year degree at the University of South Alabama, and I've worked in engineering, analytical, product support most of my career. In product support, getting out and getting to work with mechanics and owners and operators is really what I enjoy. And there's a saying that if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. And I am fortunate enough to live that dream. I'm an aircraft owner as well. We have 4 airplanes in the corral here, where I'm coming to you from tonight in my hangar in Mobile, Alabama. Superior Air Parts is based in Dallas, Texas. But I actually work remotely and at the factory. So tonight I'm coming to you from my hangar in Mobile, Alabama. We did survive Hurricane Sally. We're still picking up after that, but we did make it through. But I'm coming to you from my hangar in one of my airplanes behind me. So I do understand the cost involved, the pitfalls, the joys of aircraft ownership. And tonight, I hope that we can break down some barriers that maybe exist between mechanics and owners, at least build a foundation to ask the right questions of your aviation mechanic. And I think it'll lead to safety and probably reduce costs along the way. So we'll jump right in and choosing the right aviation mechanic. But one other thing, if you folks want, like what you hear tonight, you can go to superiorAirparts.com to the homepage, and you can download a free copy of Engine Management 101, and it's a book that I put together with Superior Air Parts, which talks about a lot of these different things with regards to aircraft ownership and doing the right thing. So more on that when we get to the end, but right now we'll jump into choosing the right mechanic. The first thing I think we should talk about is, what do owners expect of mechanics? I've dealt with a lot of owners over the years, and I think that sometimes our expectations of aircraft mechanics maybe are inflated in some way. We want every mechanic to be reliable, trustworthy. They don't charge too much. They give us a fair value. They have to know everything, every conceivable thing about my airplane, and able to fix it. We want them to be cheap, for lack of a better term, but inexpensive. We want them on our 24-hour beck and call, no doubt. And I know with regards to airplanes or automobiles or anything, I know I'm this way, is I like individualized care. I like to get somebody on the phone when I need them, when I want them, and I expect that level of service. So that's what we expect out of aircraft mechanics. What mechanics, I think, expect of owners is respect. Um, in my Engine Management 101 book, I talk about how mechanics are not given a lot of credit where credit is due. They are often stuck back in the cold hangar working on airplanes, keeping aircraft mission ready, while the young pilot who just made a really good landing gets the kudos from the passengers about a wonderful establishment the charter operation is, or what a good pilot he is, or all that kind of stuff. And they often don't get the credit that credit is due. I've seen this all my life and actually lived it. In fact, one of my first jobs, um, at right out of A&P school and flight school was, I got a job as a charter pilot. And when I wasn't flying, when the owner found out that I had an A&P license, I was in a pair of coveralls. When a charter came in, I was out of the coveralls into a tie and off I went. So I actually lived both worlds of that. And they expect credit where credit is due and thank for a job that is well done. Rarely do people do that, though. I know some of you do, but I've seen them go many times doing a great job and really don't have any acknowledgement of that. The other thing is they don't want wedges. Mechanics don't want wedges between the owners and the mechanics. Believe it or not, they really don't. They want a good, lasting relationship, a personalized relationship with their owners and operators. It's kind of a two-way street for the trust and understanding of what makes each tick. And I think that's very important in building that relationship with your mechanic. Take your mechanic to lunch, build that relationship with him, and keep that relationship. It'll only strengthen it and make it better for you and your aircraft and maintaining it. And we'll talk more about that a little later in the presentation. I want to speak a little bit about the airframe and power plant mechanic and some of the overhead expenses that they have to incur. You know, they should have technical data. There's no excuse for not having it, but they should have current technical data subscriptions to any aircraft that they are wrenching on, whether it be a Piper Cub like behind me or a sophisticated complex airplane, a Cessna 210 or something like that. They should have the engine manuals, the airframe manuals, all the service bulletins, all the technical data at their disposal. And you'd be surprised, folks, at the number of mechanics that call our technical support line and have over the years that are asking whether or not a component is affected by an AD. An IA should not be making that call. He should have that at his fingertips. But you'll be surprised at some of the mechanics that don't. And we'll learn later on in the presentation how to determine whether or not yours does have that. Tools and special equipment is another very important piece of the puzzle that an airframe and power plant has to have. It's more than just going down to the Snap-on dealer or the Craftsman dealer and getting a set of hand tools. A lot of these aircraft require very specialized equipment. And not only does it have to be specialized and is specialized, but it also has to be calibrated. And so there's expense in calibration. There's expenses in having a fixed base of operation. Airport real estate is extremely high. So airport rent is generally very high for a maintenance operator that they should have to pay. And it's very hard to compete with maybe a moonlighting A&P mechanic that's doing it out of his truck and has an air compressor. So big difference there in the amount of overhead expenses. Liability insurance is certainly something within our industry that is problematic. It is very expensive, both for mechanics, for maintenance operations, for folks like Superior Air Parts and other manufacturers. It's very, very high, and it does take a big bite out of the bottom line. Training is another factor, although there's no requirements for A&Ps to go through recurrent training. Those that hold an inspection authorization do have to do some training each year if they're not doing the number of annuals that they need to do. So there's a big bunch of expenses that the airframe and power plant does incur along the way. And we need to just keep that in the back of our mind when we're dealing with our mechanic, that they do have a lot of those expenses. And a little later, a couple of slides, we'll talk about how maybe that can be shared across other aircraft owners to help out your mechanic. Okay, what does it take to be an A&P mechanic? Well, not a lot, because they gave me one. It is not hard to do. They got to be 18 years old, read, write, and speak the English language. You need 18 months of experience on each airframe power plant, and you can attend a FA 147 school, which is what I did right out of high school. I graduated on Friday. Monday morning I was in class, a 21-month program that gives you both the training and the practical experience to pass the test, an oral, a practical, and a written. And so it's much like getting your private pilot's license. You have a written test, then you have an oral and a practical. So the oral may be what is, questions like what is atmospheric pressure, how do you do a 100-hour inspection, those types of things. And then the examiner may actually have you go and perform a task, and that's the practical side of it. So it's not that hard to get, and it's not specialized. And this is the thing that I need to really drive home, is that just because a guy or gal has an A&P does not mean that they are 100% ready to go work on your Cessna 210 or your Piper Cherokee. They have met the minimum requirements to sit for the test. In fact, when I was in A&P school, the only engine that I saw was an 0470-11, which is found on an L19 Bird Dog. Now, there's not a lot of those out there, and I haven't worked on many in my career, but that's the only engine that I saw. The practical experience, we had a Beech 18, we had a Huey helicopter, and we had a TH-55 helicopter and a Cessna 150. So there were a lot of gaps as far as my ability to just go hit the ground running and be ready to go and work on people's airplanes. Just like getting a pilot's license. You get a pilot's license in a Piper Cub does not mean you're ready to jump into a 210. There's a checkout and there's some training, and it goes the same for the A&P. Now, airframe and power plant mechanics can hold a inspection authorization. And to get the inspection authorization, they need to be active for another 2 years. They have to pass the test. They have to have a fixed base of operation. They have to have available equipment and technical data and meet the requirements of Part 6591 of the Code of Federal Regulations to have an inspection authorization. It's not that hard to get. They gave me one. I'm not the smartest tack in the box by any stretch, but it does allow that mechanic to perform annual inspections and to submit and approve major alterations and repairs and things of that nature. So when you're dealing with an A&P that has an IA, that A&P with an IA has at least more experience under his belt and has sat for the test to become an IA. Again, it's just a written test. There's no oral or practical portion of it. Then you have maintenance and repair and overhaul stations, or MROs. If you ever go in an airport or in the lobby of a maintenance shop and you see over here and looking in the right side of the screen there an air agency certificate, that's what's called, what we refer to as a repair station, or maintenance, repair, and overhaul station. And those groups have met even higher requirements specific to some task. It's a 5-step process that they have to go through, with a pre-application, then a formal application, the document compliance, demonstration and inspection, and then the certification that they get, which allows them to perform this specific function. What that basically means is that the repair station writes a set of processes for, let's say, overhauling engines, Continental 0470s and Cessna 182s. The Continental 0470, they have demonstrated that they have the tools, equipment, technical data necessary to disassemble, inspect, and overhaul those particular engines. Now, I can overhaul an engine on my A&P and sign it off, no problem. But an air agency certificate or a repair station is demonstrated to the FAA that they have a set of processes that the FAA has approved, and the FAA comes and inspects periodically, generally once a year, to make sure that that repair station is in compliance with their procedures. And so they do not have to employ A&P mechanics, they don't have to employ IAs, but they do have to demonstrate that they are competent and have the tools and equipment necessary to do the specific services that they provide. But when you see that on the wall, that's generally an indicator that they've gone to the nth degree, the top level, in order to perform services on aircraft and or engines. Let's talk about those $300 annuals. I've seen this a lot. We call them owner-assisted annuals, $300 annuals. There, believe it or not, there are a lot of this that goes on in the industry. There's a lot of pencil whipping of annuals for not a lot of money. These items, when that happens, there's items that are not inspected, they're overlooked. That can lead to airworthiness questions, whether or not we have an aircraft that's actually airworthy. I've done annual inspections on aircraft that have gone through annual after annual after annual, and they come to me and I see that there are airworthiness directives that have never been complied with, yet it was signed off. And that can be very, very, very dangerous. In some cases, the IA was just oblivious to the airworthiness directive. Deferring things, putting it off, can lead to diminished value of the airplane. I know that a lot of times, it's like we have to, and I'm in the same boat. I have to look at what can I do to the airplane when it comes in for annual. I know that I have to do the inspection. I know that I have to have some squawks. I know some of the things may be cosmetic in nature. Some of them can be deferred to a later time. They're not that critical, but I have to budget for the fact that they're going to have to be done, or I'm going to be left with an aircraft that doesn't have a whole lot of value. Our airworthiness of the aircraft lies with us, the owners. Okay, and if we go and sell the airplane, and we've done the $300 annual, we've done it's been pencil whipped, we have an incompetent mechanic that's not been doing the airworthiness directives and things like that. Guess what? When we go to sell the aircraft, and I've seen this many times, they do a pre-buy, and they've got a real savvy pre-buy inspector, and that pre-buy inspector picks that airplane apart. What happens to the value of the airplane? It starts to diminish, and all of that has to be corrected, or it has to come off the asking price of the airplane generally, and we lose. We don't really save anything at that point. We've not benefited from the enhanced safety. We've really not saved anything. We've got decreased reliability. We've got increased liability exposure. Think of this. You have an accident, and the FAA and a team of lawyers start digging through the logbooks and find that there are airworthiness directives that have not been complied with. That is not a conversation you want to have. It's not a position that you want to be in. So you have increased liability exposure, and all of the way we haven't benefited from the enhanced safety and reliability of the aircraft. So I caution folks with regards to those quick annuals. The other thing that we run up against when we're sizing up a mechanic is, I hear this probably 2 or 3 times a week. I've got the best mechanic. He's an A&P and an IA, and he's worked for the airlines for 44 years. That's wonderful, and I applaud his commitment to the airline and his service to the airline. But does he understand your piston engine? Does he have the product training? Does he have the tools and equipment? Generally speaking, they do not. Airline work is a very specialized discipline. They may work on landing gears for most of their career. They may work on power plants for most of their career. They don't really have what I would say is a well-rounded. Now, there are some that do. I mean, an example would be Bob Ripley of the American Bonanza Society. He worked for Delta Airlines and retired, but that guy is just, that's all he is about, is bonanzas, and knows them. There are a number of people that know the Cessna and know the Piper in the same way that come from the airlines. But I see this oftentimes when we have an airline mechanic that may be moonlighting in the general aviation class, oftentimes may not have the tools and equipment or the product training to work on your particular airplane. An example of this would be, that I want to point out to you, is this picture of this piston. If you look at the photograph of the piston, you can see that it has thermal erosion. It is melted. The periphery of the piston is actually melted. And this is an actual call that I received from an owner and an A&P mechanic on a conference call. And they told me that we had a broken up piston. I've already installed the cylinder, and you folks need to pay, or we're going to call our attorney and blah, 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 blah. I asked to see a picture of the piston. When I saw the piston, I said, you don't have a defective piston, you've had a detonation event. It was surprising to me that the mechanic who has an A&P and an IA did not know what detonation was or what it looked like, how it manifests itself in the picture here. And as a result, after doing that and consulting with the mechanic and the owner, you know, I listened that he was an A&P mechanic and he worked on these big jets, and I said, well, what's his piston experience? I said, he may know jets very well, but you don't have a jet, you've got a piston engine. And as we peel back the onion, what caused the detonation event was timing. This owner, when he was working on the airplane, installed a new vacuum pump, and when he removed the old vacuum pump, he turned the gear, so the magneto drive gear was clocked out of phase or out of time, and the right magneto was firing at 58 degrees before top center. And that, my friends, is what led to this melting of the piston. It led to a pre-ignition detonation event. We luckily had him caught it before they did further flight, because remember, they have already installed a new cylinder and they're about to go detonate the second cylinder because the timing was still set at 58 degrees. We were very lucky to get involved and to get that corrected. Other causes of detonation while we're talking about detonation are lack of magneto maintenance. I see this a lot with mechanics in that some of them are oblivious to the 500-hour inspection and the recommended 4-year overhaul, things like that. They're unfamiliar with carbon tracking in a magneto, and that can be problematic. Remember, just because we get a good mag check does not always mean that we have a healthy ignition system. Fuel contamination is also a biggie. Cracked spark plug insulator, as you see down there in the bottom right hand corner of your screen, a cracked insulator like that can also lead to pre-ignition detonation. That's why we say when you drop a spark plug, throw it away. Don't ever use a spark plug that you've dropped. But when you have an event like that, it's so important that we find out what happened, because we want to keep it from happening again. I like this saying. A colleague of mine came up with this many, many years ago, and ironically, he worked in the ignition systems department, but he said the lack of preventive maintenance is quite likely results in unscheduled maintenance, and the primary goal of preventive maintenance is to avoid unscheduled maintenance and enhance safety and avoid costly repairs. Remember that we, as Superior Air Parts and other manufacturers, we don't really sit around and think about things that we can make busy work for mechanics or for owners. All of the preventive maintenance schedules and things that we recommend are predicated on best practices, good engineering data, good sound data that goes a long way in helping us to go the distance with our engines and our airframes. And so it's very, very important that mechanics heed those recommendations and discuss that with you, the owner, so that it gets done and looked at. I'm having a little trouble with the screen here. I apologize. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, preventive maintenance. I'm sorry about that screen. I don't know what was going on, but we'll blame that on the remnants of Hurricane Sally. Maintenance providers treat engines differently when we're talking about engines, and we can even throw airframes in there, but mechanics do form their own opinions sometimes about how to operate, what to expect from performance, how efficient the engine should be, how durable that it can be. Many sometimes don't understand the importance of manufacturer's recommendation. There are a lot that do. Many mechanics don't have the proper training to be working on the airplane and performing this preventative maintenance. We also have people in the industry that tell us, hey, you don't need to do that. That's just busy work. You don't need to do that. Remember, folks, that if we get into a problem where we unfortunately have an accident or something like that, we never want to be that guy that says, well, I know that the manufacturer recommended that I do this, but so-and-so said I didn't have to do it. Not a good conversation to have. Careful on things with regards to the internet, unsubstantiated technical data that you may come across. Be very, very, very careful about that. We as manufacturers have responsibility to you, our customers, and to keep our products safe and reliable, and we want them to go the distance. We don't want you to have problems with that. So today, hopefully we can dispel many of these myths and things that are out there that at least we can just lead to a good foundation for good questions when talking with a mechanic. When we talk about the technical data that mechanics should have, the manufacturer is the best suited to provide that recommendation. I'm going to give you an example of how I learned the hard way here in a minute. with regards to manufacturer data and following that. The technical data that that mechanics follow is based on years of engineering testing. It's not just something that's made up. Durability and reliability testing has been at the forefront of most all aircraft manufacturers and engine manufacturers to make sure that the product is reliable. And so this data that's provided, bulletins, manuals, things like that, are there to provide that level of reliability. So I ask people all the time, why would you listen to non-manufacturers? Why would you listen to others? Be careful about that. Ensure that your maintenance provider is following those recommendations, and it's easy to determine if they are. And here's a couple of reasons how, or a couple of ways how. Technical data, ask your mechanic, do you have the technical data for my engine? Do you have a current technical data for my aircraft? There's really not an excuse for not having it. Now, when I started back, I graduated A&P school in 1984, the computer was just a twinkle in somebody's eye. So we didn't have all of the manuals at our fingertips. We had these copious libraries of manuals, and they had to be updated over and over. Now at our fingertips, we can subscribe to that technical data and have it right there at our fingertips. It can be extremely expensive for the mechanic, but they should have it. There's no excuse for not having it. Now, an idea that I have seen over the years with regards to the technical data and specialized tools, let's say you have a couple of people that own Cessna 182s or Piper Cherokees, and they're based at the same airport. You've got a good mechanic. You want to keep that mechanic. The mechanic may be struggling. You as owners can share the technical data library expense and provide that to the mechanic. Or if there are some specialized tools, perhaps you guys get together and purchase those specialized tools for mechanics that maybe don't have the means to do so. And I know it sounds a little odd that you would do that, but I want you to think for a moment about the relationship that you may build with your mechanic by providing that data to him or helping with those expenses for the specialized tools. It'll save you a lot of money in the long run, I guarantee you, if your mechanic has those tools. Now, you know, the best option is to find a mechanic that does, but if he doesn't, and you have a lot of people in the same general area that have the same aircraft, there's nothing wrong with sharing those expenses. That happens a lot in the corporate world, where you may have an airport that has a fleet of Citation jets or something like that. Those expenses are shared amongst those aircraft owners, and that way the mechanic doesn't bear the brunt of all of that expense at one time. Just a thought, and it's another tool that can be used to really build a really tight relationship with your mechanic. So it's something to consider. Does your mechanic have calibrated equipment? Ask them. Do you have calibrated torque wrenches? Do you have the right gauges? Do you have the test equipment that you need in order to work on my engine? You know, if you walk in and there's no calibration stickers on tools and things like that, that could be a red flag that those items are not calibrated, and they are very, very important that they are. And I'm going to cite an example here in a moment about that. Specialized training, you can ask, have you had Superior Air Parts training? Have you had Continental training? Have you had Lycoming training? Have you been to Cessna or Piper and received airframe, specific airframe training unique to my aircraft? Those are questions that you can ask. And then we have maintenance-induced issues. Maintenance-induced issues can be caused by those mechanics that don't follow those manufacturer recommendations. They use improper torque specifications. They may use improper sealants or lubricants. They're following hangar talk and and stuff like that, rather than what manufacturers recommend, because they don't have the technical data or the training and equipment to do so. And I'll tell you, and I'm going to give you this example, and I actually told this in the Boston Directorate of the FAA office a few years ago. I told this story, but I learned the hard way. I was that guy in that previous photo. Now, I told you I learned to fly at 16, and I aspired to be everything aviation around that time. And while I was in high school, a friend of mine who works for another engine manufacturer, he and I found out that his father, on his father's 182, had a low cylinder. And we decided that we were aspiring mechanics. We certainly had experience on tractors. Growing up here in Mobile, Alabama, we had wrenched on tractors and farm equipment, things like that. So it should not be any problem whatsoever for us to change the cylinder on this 182, and we proceeded to do so. We did not have the technical data. We did not have the torque specifications. We had a 1/2-inch ratchet wrench and some cylinder-based wrenches and things like that, and we went to town changing this cylinder. We did not achieve the proper torque on the through bolts of the engine, and the engine broke the crankshaft at about 70 hours time in service after we had changed that cylinder. Yes, the airplane was in flight, made an uneventful landing, nobody was hurt, but boy, did I learn a lesson the hard way about doing things the right way. And folks, it's so important that we follow manufacturers' recommendations, that we have those calibrated tools, and we know what we're doing, and we have the training. I didn't have any of that. And the outcome could have been disastrous, but luckily it was not, but it was certainly expensive tuition for both of us. I went on and got my A&P license to learn. I now subscribe to technical data for each aircraft that I provide maintenance and repair for. All of the aircraft that I have in my hangar, we have the current technical data for. I own calibrated equipment. If I walked over to my toolbox right now and grabbed a wrench, you'd see a calibration sticker on it. And I certainly have received specialized training on aircraft engines that I am familiar with, and airframes that I have made myself familiar with by receiving that specific training. And it's very, very important that you get that, and that your mechanic have those boxes checked off, if you will, when you're assessing whether or not you've got a good mechanic or you're choosing a mechanic. Very, very important. I want to talk about a quick note on proper torque, because what we're going to do is we're going to take this example and I'm going to kind of drill it down into the importance of, and torque is just one aspect of working on an airplane. But torque is very, 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 very important. And I use it in this example because the lack of torque is what led to, in this previous photo, the breaking of this crankshaft. Because the through bolt torque was compromised, the bearing, the main bearing, was able to walk in its saddle, move. It did not have any preload or crush. So that bearing was able to move. It moved into the fillet radius of the crankshaft, where my mouse is, if you can see that right in here. It set up a stress riser, and that's what had the crankshaft fail in fatigue after about 70 hours. But let's just drill down into torque. And what are we trying to achieve? Remember, torque specifications are predicated on engineering data. So an engineer spent a lot of time determining what that torque should be, and here's why. Torque tension is actually the amount of tension that's left on a bolt after it's been removed. We really don't care about, I mean, the end goal is in some ways to measure the torque of the fastener or the twist, but the real measurement, what we're trying to get to, is the stretch of the bolt. And the stretch of the bolt in tension is what holds things together, what holds an aircraft engine together, what holds the wings on the airplane and things like that. And they should be at their proper torque. Bolts actually act as a spring, a coil spring. And when we torque them up, their tendency to restore themselves is what holds the items together. It's what pulls it together. Think of it as you take a rubber band and you fold it over a couple of times on your hand like that. That tendency for that rubber band to restore itself is exactly what we're trying to achieve when we're talking about torque. We're talking about the little stretch on the bolt. Some of the more sophisticated, like Pratt & Whitney, PT6, and some of those highly stressed fasteners, they actually have an apparatus that can stretch the bolt to the specified length, and then they just run the fasteners down and the bolt is torqued. So they're not measuring the force that's required to turn to achieve that. They're actually stretching the fastener. Some connecting rod bolts and Lycoming engines that some of you have, they're stretch type bolts. They're measured before torque and then they're measured after torque to ensure that they have achieved that stretch that we're talking about. And that tendency for that stretch to restore itself, just like a rubber band, is what holds it together. Bolts must be stretched in order to avoid the failure. And generally when they're torqued properly, they won't come loose. Bolts that are under torque, not torqued properly, can lead to fretting and things like that, where they can break and the fastener come loose. Just a quick note on Hooke's law, which is talking about the stretch on a fastener or the distance. If you take, say, a 5/16 by 18 3 3/4 bolt, and you have a 3-inch distance, which is pretty close to a main bearing saddle, and the yield strength of 92,000 psi, and the engineer wants 75% of that yield strength in the torque. When you do the calculation, you'll come up with about 7,000 stretch. So think of this: your aircraft engine bolt that's holding it together, the through bolt, is stretched about 7/1000ths of an inch in stretch, and its tendency to restore itself is what's holding our engine together. Very, very, very important. So a couple of things to remember, and I call these the big four. Not every mechanic is the right mechanic. Does he or she understand my piston engine? Remember, not all piston engines are the same. There's radial engines, there's continental engines, there's Superior engines, there are Lycoming engines, there's Franklin engines, there's Warner engines. And while they may have the same, their internal combustion engines, their tools, equipment, technical data, torque specs are not the same. And we can't apply the torque of a Continental engine to a Lycoming engine or vice versa. Does he or she have the specific product training for both my aircraft and my engine? That's a really, really good question to ask. And if they don't, that's a red flag. Do he or she have the proper tools, equipment, and technical data? That's very, very important. Again, if they don't have it, and you want to keep the mechanic you really like working, you have a good working relationship, and he doesn't, you'll be money in the bank to go and get that data for them. Many of them have it, don't get me wrong, but I speak to so many who don't, and that's why I want to bring that up. And I do that in the interest of your safety, that you ask those questions. Also ask his or her resume. It doesn't have to be a formal resume, but you can do a question and answer. What is your experience in maintaining an airplane like mine? How many airplanes have you maintained like this? How many years have you done? What kind of problems have you run into? Those are good questions to fill out the mechanic and whether or not they are suited to be the one for you. Owners and operators should ensure adherence to manufacturers and recommendations. Only use trained and qualified maintenance people. Don't go get the high school kid like me that's got the 1/2-inch ratchet wrench that'll change the cylinder for for little or nothing. Get qualified people. You always want qualified people working on your aircraft. Have them follow maintenance recommendations, operational recommendations. If there's something that comes up, that it's an idea or a concept that's outside of the manufacturer, question that is to the validity of that, and consult your respective manufacturer about that. Doing all this will just lead to reduced life cycle, enhance safety, and improve reliability and enjoyment of your airplane. And at the end of the day, you'll have an airplane that's going to retain its value and its resale value and things like that. And you won't get caught at the time it comes to sell or upgrade with something that you can't sell. A quick few notes about Superior Air Parts. We are the manufacturer of the Millennium cylinder. We have a leading industry warranty of 37 months, parts and labor. We have thousands of FAA PMA parts for both Lycoming and Continental. To find out about that, if you'll go to our website, it's superiorparts.com and click on hover over technical support, then down to superior eligibilities. You can choose that, and you'll see a lot of the parts that we have. While we're here at the home page, if you'll look there, you can see my ugly face in the book, Engine Management 101. So if you go to superiorAirparts.com, you can click there and get your free digital copy of Engine Management 101. And in that book, we cover things like engine leaning, compression testing, ignition systems. It's just, you know, it was written, the spirit of the book was written to help our customers, our owners, to dispel a lot of the myths and things like that about how they should be operating and maintaining their engine and aircraft. So I invite you to go get your free copy, and I hope you enjoy that. But when you click on the superior eligibilities there, choose superior eligibilities, then you can put in your Lycoming engine or your Continental engine, or you can search by part number. And once you put that in, you'll get say we put in a 6411066 O-ring or cylinder base O-ring. You'll see all the eligibilities that the O-ring can be used on. So it's a very, very good tool. Mechanics use this all the time. Owners use this all the time when they're looking for parts. You know, when you have the question, what does Superior make that I can use on my engine? Each item is broken down. Each component is broken down. Say you order a cylinder assembly, it tells you exactly all of the contents in this cylinder assembly, such as piston, rocker shaft, gaskets, ring sets, all that kind of stuff is all listed within there again at our website. So I invite you to go and explore our website. And again, I thank you for your time this evening. And at this time, I'll take any questions about choosing a mechanic.
Hello. Okay, great. Okay, let's see here. Tim is asking, can I expect higher quality maintenance from a manufacturer service center if I take my Cessna to a Cessna service center? He thinks he's getting better maintenance because he's taking it to a service center. Can he expect a higher quality service?
Yes, and that's an excellent question, Tim, and I thank you for that. And that's a very, very good point. You know, while we talked about the maintenance, repair, and overhaul of the repair stations, there are those repair centers like a Piper Repair Center or a Piper Service Center or a Cessna Repair or Cessna Service Center. And those people have undergone additional training after their A&P license specific to the Cessna product or to the Piper product or to whatever respective engine manufacturer. Yes, you can expect to get a very good level of service. At least you know that they've had the extra training, and generally those OEMs such as Cessna and Piper and others watch those service centers very closely and provide recurrent training and things like that. So absolutely good choice to use a service center, yes.
Okay. Another question from Merrick is, if an IA needs to be fixed base operator, how do mobile IAs check out this box?
I'm not sure that I understand totally the question. The IAs, they IAs do require to have a fixed base of operation,
Yes.
but that is somewhat lackadaisical and is rarely enforced by the FAA. The guy with the pickup truck and the compressor could come to your hangar and work on your airplane and say, this is my fixed base of operation, is the owner's hangar. And that's the difference. Or if he's out in a T hangar or something like that. So it's a very, very gray area. The reg do say that he has to have a fixed base of operation, but there are many moonlighting type of mechanics out there that do not.
Okay, excellent. Christian Nelson, Mike Bush recently said, never pull a cylinder if you can possibly avoid it. Try to avoid pulling it more than once, one at a time if possible. Eschew top overhauls like the plague. What do you think about that?
Well, I understand Mike's position in that Mike, and Mike's a good friend of mine. Mike has the position that doing that type of work can be problematic, and it can be only if it's done by unqualified personnel. But a top overhaul in the presence of a qualified mechanic with the proper tools is a very benign operation to the engine, and nothing to be afraid of. Also, with regards to pulling the cylinder, I've heard Mike comment about, with the cylinders off, you don't want to rotate the engine because the bearings will turn. That is not true at the engine manufacturers. One of the things they do, once a case is bolted together without cylinders, the bearings are there. The belly bone bolts and the backbone bolts are sufficient enough at that slow speed to turn by hand that the bearing is not going to rotate. It's only under the dynamics of combustion where you have fretting and movement of the crankcase where the bearing can actually walk. So there's nothing to be concerned about with regards to rotating an engine with the cylinders off of it.
Okay. Yeah, and Gary has kind of a little bit of a comment with that, because some of the things that you're saying are a little bit opposite of what Mike Bush is saying, but I think you kind of clarified that there's a little.
Mike and I don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, and that's true. Mike is kind of a fix it when it breaks kind of guy, and I'm like, let's not let it break. You know, so we don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, but my bet is that by doing what the manufacturer recommends, you will beat to the TBO anybody that's saying don't do those things. Those things are predicated on engineering data, best practices, and information from field service, not from, well, I just don't think it needs to be done. These are real things, and they're very, very important. And yes, I recognize that there is a despair between what Mike says and what I say a lot, but that's I'm right and Mike's wrong, right?
Yeah, there we go. Okay, all right, that's right. Let's see here. Gary, another comment from Gary is regarding what manufacturers recommend versus your airplane needs. I'm not sure I understand it. It's more of a comment versus a question regarding what manufacturers recommend versus what your airplane needs.
That's a very good question. I think I understand that. And let's take the manufacturer's recommendation where we would employ a little logic and reasoning and things like that, because a lot of people walk away from here saying, well, Bill's all about the regulations and all about the recommendations, so at TBO I have to replace my engine, and that's not the case. So let's take the TBO question. My engine TBO is 2,000 hours. Do I have to replace it at 2,000 hours just because the manufacturer said so? In this case, no. But what's important is the manufacturer gave us instructions for continued airworthiness to be able to assess that engine at 2,000 hours and see if it can go on. So we're using a little bit of both. We're using the recommendations set forth by the manufacturer to take the engine beyond TBO. And yes, we don't have to hardline recommend, that the engine be, or change the engine just because the manufacturer recommends it 2,000 hours. But there are times when, an airplane may say, check the tightness of wing bolts or recheck the torque on something. Those are very important items that don't need to be missed. So we have to take each one with a qualified mechanic that understands, what's going on with the engine and how to assess it, whether or not it's airworthy for continued airworthy or continued use.
Okay. Norm would like the link to the Engine 101 book, your book again, the digital link. So if we can find it.
That's easy. It's superiораirparts.com. That's our homepage, superiораirparts.com. And just click on the homepage and you'll see the book down there, and it says click here for your free digital copy. It's real simple to do.
And if you have any other questions, Norm, just send me an email. I'll make sure I forward that link to you. Merrick has another question. Who do you allow to do MAG maintenance? Your mechanic or a specialized shop?
That's an excellent point, and an excellent question. I am qualified on my airplanes I have the tools, equipment. I could take the MAG apart, clean it, do the 500-hour inspections, and I do so. When it comes time for overhaul, I just replace them, or I send them to overhaul shop and have them overhauled. That's the way that I do it. But a licensed airframe and power plant mechanic can do those overhauls or the 500-hour maintenance on the magnetos, either one. I like sending it to someone who does it every day. Mm-hmm. I don't work on magnetos every day, and I like to have the latest and greatest at my disposal. So I normally just send those off and have them overhauled.
Okay. Christian Nelson has a question. In regards to reliability, what's your, quote unquote, your opinion on what is the best Lycoming or Continental?
Oh, the best engine out there is the Superior Air Parts engine. But let me make a couple of comments about that. And of course, I have to be very, very careful because one of those was I used to work. Continental engines get a bad rap as opposed to Lycoming engines, because Lycomings pound for pound typically have higher compressions during a differential compression test. And the reason for that has got nothing to do with the quality of the engine, but rather the design of the ring gaps set forth by Lycoming versus Continental. And so the Continental is going to naturally, with a little larger ring gap, is going to leak down a little more and hence have a little lower compression. But that's, as far as the two, I have many hours behind both as a charter pilot. I flew old Queen Airs with IGSO 480 geared engines and maintained those, and those are just reliable as any Continental. And I think they're both great aircraft engines. I don't have a favorite over the other.
Okay. I think with an answer like that, you should be running for president. we have a comment from a guy named Ernie, and he said these are during your presentation. He came in the chat box and said, you brought up a lot of really solid points. In finding a reliable, decent mechanic can be difficult, but if he goes to, he's afraid that he might not touch his airplane.
Okay, you don't have to repeat the second half of that because for some reason it got blurbed out, but I did.
Oh, Okay, how
Can you
about now?
repeat the, yeah, you got you now. Can you repeat it, please?
So Ernie has said that you brought up a lot of really solid points during the presentation. And he is kind of fearful that if he brings up some of these points of qualifying for a mechanic, that he's fearful that his mechanic might not touch his aircraft. Like, where's your calibration sticker? Where are your certifications on the wall that show you this? You know.
Right. Here's where you have to be political again. And yes, you don't want to go in there like a bull in a china shop and demand, but when you establish a relationship with a mechanic where you're going to lunch or you're sitting around talking, you can subtly ask those questions and find out those things and walk through the shop and look at tools and look at calibration stickers and things like that without being so direct and all is to make the mechanic mad and make them where they won't want to work on your engine. Um, you just have to walk softly, um, build the relationship with the mechanic. And I've dealt with the crusty old mechanic all my life, is who I was mentored by many of them. And you have to learn how to approach each and every one of them, and you do so subtly. And I've found that the best thing to a mechanic's heart is through his stomach. So taking them to lunch is a great way to build that relationship.
Okay. Let's see here. A comment from Jeff. Thank you, Jeff. He said, this is from the FAR, 65.91, section C, number 3, here's the definition for the fixed base operators. The fixed base of operations only needs to be a place where an IA can be located in person or by phone during a normal work week. It does not need to be where they perform their work. Period.
Well, that is true. The letter of the law, that all they have to be is contacted. But when they are working on an airplane, they do need a place to do so, and they need a safe place to do so. And so the regulation goes a little bit further than that, or the interpretation is that you should have a nice place to work or a place to work. But that is true. Having a home with a phone is really all you by regulation have to have. That is a true statement.
Okay. Merrick has another question or a concern. You're on the road, you've got a problem. The local shop has a talented supervisor, but a young buck is your guy. Watching him, you're not too confident. What do you do?
Well, you're talking about the safety and reliability of an aircraft. And if you have an uneasy feeling, I think it's time to get on the phone with his supervisor and tell them that you're not comfortable. I don't think that there's anything wrong in doing that. If you see him going around the airplane like a bull in the china shop, he's doing things that you know are not right, or you don't think is right. I see no problem in calling off the dogs and say, hey, stop, I'm going to get you do it with a doctor and getting a second opinion. And so I don't see any reason why you wouldn't call his supervisor or say, hey, just stop it right now. I'm going to get my mechanic to travel, or I'm going to seek out some other help. Again, we're talking about an aircraft, and it's nothing to fool around with. You don't want someone who doesn't know what they're doing working on the airplane. Just don't
Right,
want it.
right,
Good
right.
question. Good question.
Yeah, it was, yeah. All right, I think that looks like that might be about it for the questions. Let's see here, Jen's
I'm
gonna
going to
come
scooch
over.
into the screen here.
Oh, there is one more thing before we
yeah.
do the pick the name for the $50 gift card from Aircraft Spruce. Is for all those that are listening, if you can send me an email for recommendations of a good mechanic. People do ask us if they've got a recommendation in Tempe, Arizona, or somewhere in Illinois. It'd be nice for us to put a list together. We have one for Eddie Current because of the situations at hand, and this topic here is great because sometimes people are new to airplane ownership and they're looking for recommendations. So if you've got someone you've got a relationship with and you're very, very happy, you would recommend them, please email me at kent@aviationgroupltd.com. Love to start a list. There is one more question I had, Bill, is during the conversation, you said it's, owners of airplanes can get together and purchase some equipment. Let's say they purchase something, it's a $5,000 piece of equipment for eddy current or something very expensive. If the mechanic starts using that for their airplanes, but wants to use it for somebody else that didn't purchase it, what about the liability? Who does that fall upon? Any suggestions?
That's an excellent question. And what normally happens is, because this has come up all the time, the third party who's not part owner of the equipment pays an hourly rate for the use of that equipment or a rental of that equipment. That equipment is usually calibrated, so the liability is pretty low. It would all fall back on the general liability of the mechanic. But things like specialized jacks and things like that have very, very low risk involved in that. But when you have a group that's shelled out the money for that, it's not fair that the mechanic go and use that. So what they usually do is they develop a rate, and guess what? The owners can get a little kickback from that and start to pay for the equipment and things like that. So it's a great way to get the things that we need to maintain our airplane. And I think the risks are very, very low, and certainly the benefit outweighs the small risk involved.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Comments afterwards, just great presentation. Thank you. Great presentation. Even after 1,000 hours I'm flying that, I can always learn something. So that was from Lewis. Excellent. Yeah, so thank you, Bill, very much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Appreciate that and all those. And again, for Superior Air Parts, Aircraft Sprues for sponsoring and being here tonight. I know it's kind of late, but thank you everybody for being here. Much appreciated.
And join us next month. We'll be sending out information, but we'll be doing another webinar with Bill in about a month.
Yes.
So watch for that info.
Yep.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Have a good evening.
night.
Bye-bye, everybody.